I've always had a major thirst for adventure. As a child, while many of my friends were collecting pictures of pop stars and soccer stars and putting them on their bedroom walls, I was leafing through the dog-eared copies of National Geographic magazine from my father. And on my wall were pictures of George Mallory and Sherpa Tenzing. I've always been addicted to mountains, and that's where my thirst for adventure started. I'd like to take you through a little bit of a history of how some of the lessons that I learned in my early years of climbing have stood me in such great stead in terms of the work that we do with the Kingsley Aldgate Foundation. And this is not a world first. Many of you will know about the 7 summits, but I'd like to just take you through a small journey. It's a private journey and some of the lessons that we learned. The 7 summits, as you know, represent the highest peak on every single continent in the world. A number of people have climbed it, but this is my personal journey through. We started always being an avid trekker through mountains. And my climbing partner whispered in my ear when we were in a small hill called Kalapatar in Nepal with a view of Everest, wouldn't it be a great idea, Mike, if we climbed Everest and the 7 summits? Now, we were just interested in trekking. We'd never climbed before. We had a bit of time going down from base camp to Kathmandu, and I think in a particular bar called the Yak and Yeti in Kathmandu, we decided that climbing the 7 summits would be a really good thing to try and achieve. And we put a little timetable together, and we thought maybe 3 years to achieve that. We started our quest for the 7 summits, and we were rather successful. We knocked off the first sort of 3 trekking peaks of Aconcagua in South America, of Kilimanjaro in our own Mama, Africa, and then basically through to Mount Elbrus in Russia. And we were very successful, but we made our first fatal mistake by taking on the big one too early. We decided to do Everest and go into the big league literally at 8,858 meters and attempt to climb it by the North Ridge on the Tibetan side. We were unfortunately very unsuccessful. And we learned a lesson that day. On the North Ridge, there was a storm, and we were told 3 times by our Sherpas to turn round. The group of 4 climbers on the rope all decided that they knew a little bit better, and we carried on and carried on. The weather got so bad, we were turned around 300 meters from the summit. And the weather was so bad, one of our team didn't make it back. And that was our first lesson in climbing. And it's a first lesson on expedition. It's about ego. When you've got an ego, you please leave it at the airport. And that's a lesson that we learned very strongly on that day. Also on that day, equipment. We ignored the advice of our Sherpas to change our socks and shoes as we went into the camp at Camp 3 above 8,000 meters. The socks froze. Our expedition member lost 2 toes. So that was a very unsuccessful trip that we had to Everest, but we learned from our lessons. And we made our way through to Denali and through to Mount Vinson in Antarctica. Mount Vinson was a classic mountain in Antarctica, logistically very difficult to get to, and very, very cold. And we did learn the art of patience. We were hemmed in for 2 weeks in bad weather at Patriot Hills Base Camp. And spending 2 weeks with a bunch of Russians we got to know extremely well. And we certainly learned that they really know how to drink in that particular country, as they certainly showed us a few things about vodka drinking in that 2 weeks that I don't think I'll ever forget. The other big peak that we climbed was Denali. Now, Denali is basically renowned because there is no support on Denali. You carry everything yourself. There are no Sherpas, there are no porters. You carry everything in either a big pack or you carry it in a sledge and you drag it up yourself. It's extremely cold. It was minus 20 on top. And one of our expedition members unfortunately never read the kit list. Another fatal mistake. Not fatal, but very painful in this particular case. He nearly lost his hands because he didn't read the kit list. I mean, it's a very simple thing, but that's what not doing the instructions can do. We moved on from there with success in Denali and also in Antarctica to Pakistan, where we decided to go and climb both Broad Peak and K2, or at least have a go. We then learned the other thing about mountain, and it came out of one of the speakers this morning, is that no matter how much you control the controllables that you have, your kit list, your own mental capacity, your own training, what you can't control is what happens in nature. Something comes from stage right that you had absolutely no idea what was happening. And this was an avalanche that basically took out all our ropes. Unfortunately, everybody was safe, but it took out all our ropes. It took out all our ladders that we had on Broad Peak. So that was another lesson learned. As was this. This is me trying to climb across a four ladder crevasse. And that very morning, I'd actually worked out that my crampons weren't fixing correctly. And instead of actually sitting down and rethreading them and getting them correct, I decided to just fix them up, and I'm sure that they will do. Well, this is where they decided that those crampons would not work. So when you have the opportunity to fix something, fix it properly. Another lesson that we learned on the mountain. Having had success on Broad Peak, we then decided that we would give the Savage Mountain a go. Now, those of you who have read your books about mountaineering will know I'm talking about K2, which is situated across the glacier from Broad Peak. So having acclimatized on Broad Peak, you then have a go at K2. K2 is probably the most difficult of all the 14 mountains that are over 8,000 meters. And it's certainly the most difficult. It has been summited less, and it is the highest ratio of fatalities on it. It is extremely steep, and it is extremely exposed, and you basically have a different weather window to Everest. You don't have these 1 week weather windows. The weather there comes from the Hindu Kush in China. It doesn't come through from the Indian Ocean. So you don't get these high weather patterns around it. So you have to climb in bad weather. What we learned on K2 was that there is a limit to your talent. And we certainly was exposed to that limit. We managed to achieve Camp 3 at K2. This was the most exposed camp that we got to. And at that point, we decided to turn around. For no other reason, not the conditions, but we learnt that we just couldn't go on anymore. Our limit of our talent in terms of K2 was that it. And that was another great lesson. There's a limit to what you can do. And on a mountain, you better stick within those limits as much as you can. Of the 7 summit quest, we've got 2 left. We've got Everest, and we've got a little mountain in Indonesia called Carstensz Pyramid. And I've listed quite a number of lessons and failures that we had along the way of achieving this particular goal. And it all comes together. Occasionally you have great success. And this was the one time when we didn't have any failures. We actually woke up at the South Col. I know there's a number of photographs going around at the moment which shows the tremendous queues that there has been up towards the Everest summit over the last weather window, over the last week or so. And a couple of the guys I know from Kaplan Kai have got family members there. But there's a different view. 2 lone climbers climbing up the ridge towards the summit. One of those was me. And that was the day we had. It was the most perfect day. We had oxygen, we had great weather. You've probably read about Everest and the fact that most people have to turn around by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon because that's the turnaround time. We left Camp 4 at the South Col 9 o'clock in the morning and were able to turn around and get to the summit by 8 o'clock in the morning, ready for sunrise. So we had the perfect day. And it really did encapsulate for us the wonderful thing of standing on the summit and getting to the point where we're getting close to achieving our goal. And the view coming down from Everest on that perfect day, I will never forget. There's Makalu in the foreground, and in the background is Kachinjunga, 2 of the great 8,000 meter peaks. Feeling strong, feeling full of oxygen, the perfect curvature of the earth as you came down. It's something that I will certainly never forget. It left one mountain to do, and that was Carstensz Pyramid. Although it's the smallest mountain of the 7 summits, it is by far the most technical. I don't know whether there's any technical climbers here, but it's over a 4D. And that requires you to do things like the Tyrolean sling between certain parts, etc. And one lesson we learned on here, having gone there straight after Everest, was that unfortunately we couldn't get to base camp. The logistics of the locals were such that our equipment was being carried by tribes, and those tribes were in a war zone. They're difficult to get to, this particular mountain. Our equipment, 20 tons of it, was left in the middle of the jungle. Our porters were chased away by another tribe, and we had to come back home and basically count our losses. We went back the next year, and we managed to eventually achieve. I mentioned earlier that this was a 3-year project to climb the 7 summits. It took us 9 years after that joke remark of my climbing partner up that mountain in Everest to achieve it. So that's another lesson. Contingency in time. Have plenty of that. And the lessons learned. I think with the failures that we had and the mistakes that we made, I think Winston Churchill probably summed it up best as success is defined as stumbling through your failures from one to the other with a huge amount of enthusiasm. And as long as you keep that enthusiasm up, I think you'll be able to succeed. Those lessons learned, I then was privileged enough to meet Kingsley and basically meet up with him, and we chatted about the potential participation in the Kingsley Aldgate Foundation, and we talked about mountain biking. We talked about cycling. We've seen from the videos that Kingsley has shown the wonderful images of 4-wheel drives going through Africa and the communities that we touch. Imagine touching those communities on a 2-wheel bike. There's no bubble around you. You're actually open. In a continent where there are 4 times as many bikes as there are cars, it's particularly relevant. Here you see the economy of Africa being carried around on a bicycle. There's kids going to school on bicycles. There's mamas going to their health clinic on bicycles. Always communities on bicycles. So we thought this was a wonderful idea. Over the years, we started with expeditions, transfrontier expeditions from one side of Africa to the other. And finally, we basically did an expedition down the Rift Valley from Djibouti in the north all the way down to this wonderful park that Kingsley mentioned, Gorongosa, at the end of the Rift Valley. And these were 1,000 or 2,000 kilometer journeys on a bicycle. And the key thing was giving back. Every day at the end of your cycle, you were able to go into a village and set up malaria work, or you were able to do Right for Sight classes and some humanitarian work. 2 of the expeditions that were very memorable that we've carried out over the last few years was we as an expedition team are always looking, as Kingsley said, we are avid adventurers. We love adventure. And we're always looking for, and unlike, unfortunately, as we've heard from Sylvia and Hanley, that there's lots of world firsts out there in the ocean. Unfortunately, on terra firma, there's very few left. And our expedition team was always looking to try and achieve and claim the 7 extreme points of the continent as defined by the National Geographic. North, south, east, west, the highest point, the lowest point, and the geographic center point. This particular expedition took us to the geographic heart of Africa. How we determined that particular point was very interesting. It was a scientific journey that was ratified by the International Geographic Union. And we basically worked out that Africa as a continent which is effectively an island continent. And we used a typical mythology that was used in Australia, where it had been agreed that there was a circular point in Australia that was the geographic heart. We'd been determined. Using that same mythology, using the Suez Canal, we've effectively got an island continent in Africa. We wrote to the IGU and they confirmed that, yes, that is in fact correct. And we wanted to use the center of gravity method, whereby we basically cut that plate of the African continent and that shape. and we balance it on a pin. And where that point is, they confirmed that was the correct method of doing it. We then embarked the University of Cape Town. We did 250,000 GPS points on the high water mark around Africa, fed them into an algorithm and a computer, and out came the latitude and longitude where that particular shape would balance on a pin. We sent that to the IGU, and they confirmed back again, yes, indeed, that's the latitude and longitude of the heart of Africa. And the expedition team, nobody had been there. So we were going to be the first expedition team, hopefully, to claim it. We had to do it quickly for 3 reasons. One is that we had a hole in our expedition calendar that we wanted to do at a particular time. 2, the actual geographic center point is in the northeast corner of the Republic of Congo. That's Congo Brazzaville. And it's in the Congo floodplain. And we had to go there when the Congo River was not in flood. Otherwise, it would be underwater. We wouldn't be able to get there. And the third point, with my regrets to Ramon in mentioning it, we knew if those points got out into the geographic world, there'd be a French team in there probably to go there and steal the point. So we had to go there quickly. The journey took us from South Africa, Botswana, through Zambia, crossing rivers, and through the Kafue National Park in Zambia, all on a bicycle across dugout canoe. Kafue National Park, if any of you have been there in Zambia, it's an absolute central point for the tsetse fly, and it is the absolute bane of anybody on a cyclist. The tsetse fly will come out at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and it is a fly like this. It will give you an incredible bite. It's difficult to kill, and it can make your life misery. We found that we can do one of 2 things. One, spray us down with some Dettol, and we can go through and it sort of scares them away for a while. Or alternatively, for those that you've been into Africa and you've seen in the bush those blue sheets, tsetse flies attracted to the blue, I will basically make sure that somebody else in my expedition team has got a blue pair of shorts on, and they will keep the tsetse flies away from us. The geographic heart of Africa, as I said, is in the Congo Basin. It was incredibly difficult to get to. We were only able to drive there within 17 kilometers of the point. And from there, we took a local village of Barker, the Pygmy tribesmen, and they basically escorted us in to this area where nobody had ever been to. And there's Kingsley being led through the mud and through the rain. We ran out of water. We thought it'd take 3 days. It took a week. And we had to learn to drink water from the vines, all taught to us by the Barker tribesmen. The key thing, again, about these expeditions, we did achieve the heart of Africa. We put our point in there, and we are down in the book of achieving and claiming that particular point for our expedition team. But again, the way we treated the Barker tribesmen afterwards and the humanitarian work we did with them was quite incredible. The next expedition was to complete these 7 key points of Africa. And the one point that had never been reached, and hadn't been because no European had stood there for 35 years, was the extreme eastern point of Africa, which is in Puntland in Somalia. Obviously, it's a war-torn, it's run by warlords, and there was no way that anybody could get there. We managed to get some logistical support from Coca-Cola. One of the wonderful things about expeditioning in Africa is the support you need. You can either get it from Coca-Cola or the cell phone tower base. And if you've got a cell phone tower or you've got a Coca-Cola factory, you've got some support. The guys from Coke provided a private army, and we managed to achieve and cycle. This was again another 3,500 kilometer journey to the eastern point in Rasafun, and achieve that wonderful position there. The expedition, it is an expedition team. The Kingsley Aldgate Foundation ties up unique and in some cases world-first expeditions with a wonderful work that is being done both in conservation and humanitarian work.